The morning sun was just beginning to rise when the small white plane rolled down the runway. The soft hum of the engine filled the air, blending with the distant sound of waves crashing against the coast. The pilot adjusted his headset and gave a quick thumbs up to the ground crew before taking off into the clear sky. It was supposed to be an ordinary flight, nothing out of the usual. He had flown this route many times before, a delivery run across the Pacific from one island chain to another. The air was calm, the ocean below endless and blue. Flying alone didn't bother him. In fact, he liked it that way. It gave him time to think, to be with the sky. The radio played a faint song through static, and he found himself humming along. On flights like this, he often used a small camera attached to the dashboard. He liked recording the view, clouds drifting by, the sparkle of the sun on the water. It was more of a habit than anything serious. About 2 hours into the flight, he noticed something odd. The navigation screen blinked for a second, showing a blank patch where there should have been open sea. He tapped the monitor, thinking it was a glitch, but when he looked out of the window, he spotted something unusual in the distance. It looked like land. He frowned. There wasn't supposed to be any island here, at least none marked on his flight path. Curiosity tugged at him. He decided to take a closer look. Turning the plane slightly, he began to circle lower. The island grew clearer, thick green trees covering most of it, surrounded by a narrow strip of pale sand. No boats, no buildings, no smoke, just wilderness. He glanced at his fuel gauge, still enough to spare a few minutes, and flipped on his camera, aiming it through the window to capture the strange find. As he circled again, he noticed something move near the shoreline. It was small at first, barely visible between the shadows of palm trees. Maybe a bird, maybe an animal. He zoomed in using the camera, trying to focus. The movement came again, sharp and clear this time. His heart gave a quick beat. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. He blinked, unsure if he was seeing it right. The figure was waving, an arm raised high, moving back and forth. At first, he thought it might be a trick of light or the reflection of the plane's wing. But no, it was real. Someone was waving, trying to be seen. He pulled the plane around for another pass, keeping his eyes locked on the spot. The person was standing at the edge of the beach, looking small against the vastness of the island. The pilot's stomach tightened. What was someone doing out here in the middle of nowhere? There were no known villages or resorts in this area, no shipping routes nearby. The place was completely isolated. He switched his radio, trying to reach the nearest air traffic control. "Control, this is Flight 72. I'm over an uncharted island. I see signs of human presence. Do you copy?" Static answered him. He tried again, adjusting frequency. Still nothing. He was too far out. His mind raced. If someone was stranded there, they could have been there for days, months, maybe longer. The person below was still waving, desperate, jumping up and down now. He could make out tattered clothing, bare feet, and a thin frame. The pilot grabbed his binoculars from the side pocket and tried to focus, but the motion of the plane made it hard. Still, he could see enough to know this person needed help. He felt a chill despite the heat in the cockpit. His hands tightened on the controls. He couldn't land here. There was no clear space, only trees and rocks. And his plane wasn't built for water landing. He thought of dropping a note or some kind of message, but he had nothing ready for that. He needed to mark the location first. He leaned forward, noting the coordinates on a pad beside him. The numbers flickered on the GPS for a second before stabilizing. He wrote them twice just in case. As he circled one more time, the person below started doing something strange. They were dragging something through the sand, tracing large shapes. At first, it looked random, but as he gained distance and height, he saw it, the letters forming slowly. The pilot swallowed hard. There was no mistake now. Someone was stranded and alive. He looked again at the fuel gauge, right almost at the halfway mark. He couldn't risk staying too long. He had to get back and report this. But leaving felt wrong. He hovered a bit longer, dipping the plane's wings side to side, hoping the person below understood he had seen them. The figure waved again, this time with both arms. It broke his heart to turn away. As he flew off, the island grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared beneath the clouds. The silence in the cockpit felt heavier than before. The radio hissed faintly, but he didn't try to speak again. His mind was spinning too fast. Who was that person? How long had they been there? He kept glancing at the coordinates he had written. They were his only link to that desperate hand waving below. He made a silent promise to himself. He would make sure someone listened. The rest of the flight felt longer than usual. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath him, but all he could see in his mind was that small strip of beach and the figure standing on it. He replayed the moment again and again, almost doubting what he had witnessed. It was strange how quickly a routine day could turn into something unforgettable. When the mainland finally came into view, he exhaled deeply, realizing he had been holding his breath for most of the return. He lowered the plane smoothly and touched down at the small coastal airport. The staff greeted him casually, unaware of the storm in his head. After shutting off the engine, he hurried to the small office, still clutching his notepad. "I need to report something," he said, his voice firm but uneasy. The man behind the counter looked up, surprised. "A person stranded," the pilot continued, "on an island that's not on any of the charts." He showed the footage he had captured, the island, the waving figure, the faint word "help" written in the sand. The staff members gathered around the screen, murmuring. One of them frowned. "Could be a fisherman," another suggested. "Or maybe a prank?" But the pilot shook his head. "No, you can see it. That person's not just waving. They're pleading." He stayed at the office for hours, trying to get through to higher authorities, handing over the footage and coordinates. Some promised to look into it, others said it could take days. He didn't want to leave, but there was nothing more he could do that night. As the sun went down, he sat in his car, watching the sky turn red, feeling a strange mix of hope and guilt. He thought about that single hand raised toward the sky, and how close it had been to being unseen forever. It haunted him. He had seen something no one else had, and now it was up to him to make sure the world didn't forget. That night, before he went to sleep, he uploaded the short video clip to his computer. He watched it again in silence, and the shaking camera, the blur of the beach, and that unmistakable wave from below. Then he pressed record and spoke softly into the microphone. "I don't know who you are," he said, voice steady. "But I saw you, and I'm going to make sure someone finds you." He didn't realize it then, but that small promise he'd made in a quiet room after a long flight was about to set off a chain of events that would capture the world's attention and lead to a rescue no one thought possible. The morning after the flight, the pilot woke up earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much. The image of the waving hand kept flashing in his mind every time he closed his eyes. It felt too real to forget. He had handed over the coordinates and the video the previous night, but something inside him told him that wasn't enough. Things like this could get buried under paperwork or disbelief. He made a cup of coffee and opened his laptop. The video he had recorded sat on the desktop, the shaky footage, the island, and the faint figure waving from below. He watched it again, frame by frame. Even though it was slightly blurry, the desperation in that movement was unmistakable. The person on that beach wasn't waving for fun. They were trying to be seen, trying not to disappear. He decided to upload a short clip online. He wasn't looking for fame or attention. He just wanted someone else to notice what he had found. Maybe others could help identify the island. He posted the video with a simple caption. Saw someone waving from an unknown island during flight. Coordinates unclear. Sharing in case someone knows more. Within hours, the post started gaining attention. People were commenting from all over, some in disbelief, others curious. A few thought it was fake, while others tried to trace the island using satellite maps. By evening, the video had already been shared thousands of times. News outlets began reaching out, asking for interviews. He didn't expect things to move that fast. Suddenly, his phone was buzzing nonstop. Some reporters asked if it was a marketing stunt. Others wanted the exact coordinates. He tried to stay calm and focused. He didn't want the story to turn into entertainment. Someone's life was at stake. Later that night, he received a message from a rescue organization. They had seen the video and wanted to discuss a possible search mission. They asked for every detail: flight path, time, coordinates, altitude, and weather conditions. Finally, he felt a flicker of relief. Maybe now something real would happen. The next morning, he met with two officials at the small airport. They reviewed his video carefully, rewinding and zooming in. One of them nodded slowly. "It looks genuine," he said. "If that person is still there, they might have been stranded for a long time." The pilot leaned forward. "You can help, right? You can send someone?" The older man replied carefully. "We'll send a request for an aerial search, but it could take a few days to get clearance and resources. Remote islands like that aren't easy to reach. The pilot didn't argue, but he could feel frustration building. Every hour mattered. He knew that island looked untouched. No boats, no roads, no houses. Whoever was there probably didn't have food or clean water. Days could mean the difference between life and death. Over the next few days, he followed every update online. People had started calling the unknown location Signal Island. Amateur map readers and sailors tried to match its coastline using satellite tools. Some believed it was near an old trade route. Others said it could be part of a forgotten atoll that didn't appear on maps. In the middle of all the theories, a woman posted a message that caught his attention. She said her sister had gone missing more than 10 years ago, after her boat disappeared during a storm in the same region. She wondered if it could be her. The pilot read the comment over and over. He didn't know what to say, but something in her words stayed with him. The quiet hope mixed with pain. Meanwhile, the rescue request finally got approved. A helicopter team was scheduled to fly out within the week. The pilot offered to guide them using his notes and footage. They agreed to let him come along as an observer. He felt a mix of fear and excitement. It had been days since he saw that person, and he couldn't stop thinking, what if it was already too late? The day of the search came. The helicopter lifted off at dawn, blades cutting through the humid air. The pilot sat near the window, eyes scanning the endless ocean below. The other crew members checked maps and instruments. After nearly 2 hours, one of them pointed ahead. There, he said, that should be close. As they approached, the same green island appeared, silent and still under the bright sun. The pilot recognized the curve of the beach instantly. He felt his heart pound harder. The helicopter circled slowly, hovering above the shoreline. Everyone peered down. At first it looked empty, just trees swaying and waves washing against the sand. The pilot's chest tightened. He pressed closer to the window. Wait, he said suddenly, pointing. There, near the rocks. A figure was moving. The crew lowered altitude carefully. The person below stumbled out from under the shade, waving both arms wildly, just like in the video. The pilot exhaled sharply. They were still alive. The team radioed base immediately. A small inflatable rescue boat was prepared to land. The helicopter hovered as 2 rescuers made their way down. From above, the pilot could see the person collapsing onto their knees, overwhelmed. The rescuers reached them quickly, wrapping a blanket around their shoulders. Minutes later, the helicopter doors opened, and they helped the survivor inside. The pilot watched quietly as the thin, sunburned person sat trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. They looked exhausted but alive. Their lips were dry, their hands shaking. When one of the rescuers offered water, they held the bottle as if afraid it might vanish. As the helicopter lifted off again, the pilot met their eyes for a brief second. They gave him a small, weak nod, a silent thank you that spoke louder than words. Back on the mainland, medical teams were already waiting. News cameras lined up outside, but the pilot stayed back, not wanting to turn this moment into a spectacle. He just stood there watching as the stretcher was carried inside. Later, he learned the truth from the rescue team. The survivor had indeed been missing for years, lost after a sailing trip gone wrong. A storm had destroyed their boat and washed them onto that uninhabited island. They had lived off coconuts, rainwater, and fish, surviving in isolation for over a decade. The pilot felt a wave of emotion he couldn't describe. Relief, sadness, disbelief, and all at once. He realized that a simple habit, recording his flights, had ended up saving someone's life. That night, when he returned home, he watched the video again. The same image, the hand waving from below, now meant something entirely different. It wasn't just a signal of despair anymore. It was proof of hope. Proof that even the smallest act, looking twice, sharing a clip, speaking up, could change someone's fate. As the world began talking about the story, reporters tried to reach him again, but he kept his answers short. I just saw someone who needed help, he said. Anyone in my place would have done the same. Still, deep down, he knew that wasn't entirely true. Most people might have flown past, assuming it was nothing, but he hadn't. He looked closer. In the days that followed, he received letters and messages from people thanking him for what he did. Some called him a hero. He didn't feel like one. He was just a pilot doing what felt right. But when he looked at the map on his wall, now marked with a small red circle around that forgotten island, he couldn't help but smile. Because somewhere in that circle, Life had found its way back from silence. And though he didn't know it yet, that rescue was only the beginning. The story wasn't over. The person he had saved still had a truth to tell, a story that would shock everyone who thought they had been lost forever. The days after the rescue felt unreal for the pilot. One moment he was flying a routine delivery, and the next his video had sparked an international rescue story. News channels were calling it a miracle. Everywhere he looked, and online, on TV, and newspaper, the headline appeared: Pilot discovers survivor on remote island after 11 years. At first, he didn't want to be part of the attention. He wasn't used to cameras or interviews, but people were curious and the story had spread too far to stay quiet. When he finally agreed to one interview, he spoke honestly. "I didn't do anything special," he said softly. "I just saw something and couldn't ignore it." The survivor, now recovering in a hospital, was slowly beginning to speak. The doctor said she had been malnourished, severely dehydrated, and sunburned, but she was stable. She barely spoke at first, her voice weak from years without conversation. But when she did talk, the first thing she asked was what year it was. When they told her, she cried quietly for a long time. The pilot learned about her story from the news like everyone else. She had been on a small yacht with 2 others when a powerful storm hit unexpectedly. Their radio stopped working, and their boat was torn apart by waves. The other 2 were swept away. She had clung to a piece of wreckage and drifted for days before washing up on that island. She had no way to call for help. No ships passed close enough to see her. For more than a decade, she had lived completely alone. Hearing those details made the pilot's chest tighten. He couldn't imagine the kind of loneliness she must have endured, waking up every day to the sound of the same ocean, wondering if anyone even remembered her name. The footage he had captured was replayed everywhere. People watched in disbelief as the camera showed that faint figure waving from the beach. For many, it was a haunting reminder of how easily someone could vanish from the world, and how close she had been to staying undiscovered forever. A few days later, the hospital contacted the pilot. The survivor wanted to meet him. He hesitated at first, unsure what to say or how to act. But deep down, he knew he couldn't avoid it. She had become more than just a stranger on a screen. She was a life that had crossed paths with his in the most unexpected way. When he walked into her hospital room, she looked smaller than he had imagined. Thin, fragile, but with eyes that held a quiet strength. She smiled faintly when she saw him. "You're the pilot," she said in a raspy voice. He nodded, unsure how to respond. "I'm glad you're safe," he managed. She looked at him for a long time before whispering, "I thought I'd never be found." Her voice trembled slightly. "I used to watch planes sometimes. They'd pass so far above. I'd wave even when I knew they couldn't see me. I just didn't want to stop hoping." The room went silent for a few seconds. The pilot swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I almost didn't notice you," he admitted quietly. "It was just luck that I turned the camera that way." She smiled weakly. "Then I guess luck finally found me." He stayed for a while, listening as she told bits and pieces of her story. How she learned to collect rainwater using large leaves. How she fished using makeshift traps. How she marked the days by carving lines into a rock until she lost count. She said the hardest part wasn't hunger and it was silence. "You start to forget how voices sound," she said. "Even your own." When he left the hospital that evening, the sunset looked different to him. Brighter somehow, more meaningful. He realized how fragile life could be, and how easily someone could disappear without anyone noticing. In the following weeks, more of her story unfolded. Reporters uncovered old records, interviews with her family, and photographs from before she went missing. She had been an adventurous traveler, full of energy and curiosity about the world. Her disappearance had made headlines once, but as years passed, people had moved on. Her family had held a small memorial years ago, believing she was gone forever. Now the world was watching her reappear like a ghost returning to life. The reunion with her family was emotional. Cameras captured the moment her parents embraced her, tears streaming down their faces. The pilot watched the clip privately, his heart heavy but warm. He didn't need to be there, and this was her moment, not his. As the story spread, people began calling him the man who saved her. He didn't like that title. In his eyes, she had saved herself. All he did was notice, but he couldn't deny how deeply the experience had changed him. Sometimes, when he sat in his small kitchen at night, He'd catch himself staring at the ocean through the window. The waves looked peaceful, but he knew how cruel they could be. Somewhere out there, other lost people might still be waiting, waving from unseen places. A few weeks later, a documentary crew approached him and the survivor to record their story. She agreed, wanting to use her experience to raise awareness about missing people and forgotten islands that never make it to the maps. The pilot agreed too, though he preferred to stay behind the camera. During filming, she told the interviewer something that stayed with him forever. "When I saw that plane," she said, "I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was another dream. I had seen so many clouds shaped like wings that I stopped trusting my eyes. But when it came closer, I just ran. I didn't think, I just waved and waved until my arms hurt." The pilot watched from behind the crew as she spoke, her eyes glistening but calm. He realized then that courage wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was just the quiet decision to keep waving even when you think no one's watching. After the filming, she walked up to him outside the studio. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement. "I'm planning to visit the island again," she said. "Not to stay, but to leave something behind, a mark. Maybe a sign for anyone else who gets lost." He nodded slowly. "Do you want me to come with you?" She smiled. "I'd like that." Months later, they returned together, this time with a small team. The island looked the same, wild, untouched, peaceful in a strange way. She stood on the same beach where she had once waved for help. The sea breeze tangled her hair, and for a moment she just stood there, silent. Then she picked up a stick and began to write in the sand again. Not help this time, but a single word. Found. The pilot watched her, feeling a lump in his throat. It was a simple word, but it carried everything. Pain, hope, survival, and peace. As the tide began to rise, the waves slowly washed the letters away. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had finally seen her. That night, back at the hotel, the pilot looked out at the stars above the ocean. The same sky he had flown under countless times before now felt different. He realized that sometimes life gives you moments that change everything, not because they're big or dramatic, but because they remind you how fragile, how precious, and how deeply connected every life really is. And though he didn't know what lay ahead, he knew one thing for sure. He would never fly another route without looking twice, because you never know who might be waving from below. The months following the rescue changed both their lives in quiet but deep ways. The pilot had returned to his usual flights, but things didn't feel the same anymore. Every time he looked out over the ocean, he thought of that island, the strip of white sand, the waving figure, and how close it all came to being missed. Meanwhile, the survivor was slowly rebuilding her life. The doctors said she was recovering well, though it would take time to regain her strength. She spent long hours in therapy, learning to adjust to the noise, lights, and movement of the world again. After living in silence for more than a decade, even something simple like hearing traffic or watching TV could feel overwhelming. She began to write down her memories, small details from the island, moments of fear, and the few bright pieces of hope that kept her going. Sometimes she shared them with the pilot, who visited every few weeks. They didn't talk much during those visits. Sometimes they just sat in the hospital garden, listening to the sound of the wind. He had become a kind of quiet anchor for her, someone who understood the silence between words. One afternoon, while talking with investigators, she mentioned something that made everyone pause. She said that she hadn't been alone when she first arrived on the island. There had been another person with her, one of the crew from the yacht. His name was never revealed publicly, but she said he had survived the storm with her and helped her build shelter during the first few months. But one day, after searching for food deep in the forest, he never came back. She had searched for him for days, calling out until she lost her voice. She never found him. After that, she stopped trying to count the days altogether. The news channels picked up that part of her story quickly. It became a mystery when what had happened to him. Some said he might have been swept away by the sea. Others believed he could still be out there, lost on another part of the island. The rescue team that had gone back to gather her belongings searched but found nothing conclusive. The pilot knew this part of the story weighed on her. Every time she mentioned him, her voice would trail off as if the words carried too much memory. Despite everything, she was trying to move forward. She gave a few careful interviews, speaking softly but honestly. People admired her strength, calling her a symbol of survival. But she didn't like that label. "I'm not a symbol," she said once during a quiet conversation with the pilot. "I'm just someone who didn't give up." He nodded. "That's exactly why people need to hear your story," he said. "It gives them hope." She smiled faintly. "Hope is all I had," she whispered. They stayed in touch often, talking about simple things, weather, flying, and sometimes about dreams. She told him she still dreamed of waves at night, sometimes peaceful, sometimes loud and crashing. He told her he still dreamed of the moment he saw her from above, that split second where everything changed. Months later, she finally returned to her family home. The reunion had been emotional, but adjusting to normal life wasn't easy. The world had changed so much. Technology, fashion, even language felt strange to her. People wanted to ask questions about survival, but no one asked about loneliness. That was the part she couldn't explain. The pilot continued flying his usual routes, though now he carried a small notebook with him. Whenever he saw something unusual from the air, a reflection, a distant shape, a shadow, he wrote it down, not because he expected to find another lost person, but because he couldn't shake the habit of paying attention. One evening, while reviewing one of his flight recordings, he noticed something familiar. The coastline of the island appeared again, not because he planned it, but because one of his delivery routes happened to pass nearby. Out of curiosity, he zoomed in on the footage. The beach looked empty, untouched again, but in one spot near the tree line there was something new, a small wooden cross standing upright in the sand. He paused the video and stared for a long time. He knew what it meant. The cross was her way of saying goodbye, a quiet mark for the person who never came back. He decided to call her, though he wasn't sure if he should mention it. When she answered, her voice was calm but distant. "I went back there," she said softly before he could even ask. "I had to. It didn't feel right to move on without leaving something behind." He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "I saw it in the video. It's beautiful," she sighed lightly. "It's strange. That place was my prison for so long, but when I went back it felt peaceful, like it wasn't just about being lost anymore. It was about being found." Their conversation that night lasted longer than usual. They talked about what it meant to survive, about what it meant to be seen. She said something that stayed with him. "People think survival is about being strong, but it's really about waiting for one good moment, one chance, and not giving up before it arrives." After that, the two kept in touch less frequently, but their connection remained. Sometimes she sent him small notes, photographs of the sea, short letters about her new life. One of them said, "Every time I see a plane, I wave. Not because I'm lost, but because I remember what it means to be found." The pilot framed that letter and hung it on his wall. It became a quiet reminder of how much one moment could change everything. But the story wasn't finished yet. Months later, a team of researchers exploring the region discovered remains of an old campsite deeper inland on the same island. There were traces of tools, a burned fire pit, and weathered pieces of wood. Among the items, they found a metal watch, its strap rusted but the engraving still visible. It matched the name of the missing crew member from her yacht. When the news reached her, she didn't cry. She simply nodded and whispered, "He stayed close all along." It brought her a kind of peace she hadn't felt before. The world eventually moved on from the story. New headlines took over. But for those two people, the pilot and the woman who once waved from below, the memory never faded. Sometimes, during long flights when clouds rolled across the horizon, the pilot would imagine the island hidden somewhere beneath them. He would lower his altitude just a little, not because he expected to see anyone, but because it felt right to look. He knew that one day, people would forget the details, the video, the headlines, the interviews, but what would remain was something deeper. The reminder that even the smallest act of noticing could save a life. And for her, every time she stood near the ocean, she felt the same wind she once felt on that beach. It no longer carried fear. It carried gratitude. She had been lost, but she was found, not just by a passing plane, but by someone who cared enough to look twice. Their paths had crossed by chance, but that chance had rewritten both their lives forever. And though time would move forward, that one moment, a hand waving from below and a pair of eyes looking down from above, would always stay suspended in memory. Proof that hope, even when forgotten, can still be seen. Years passed quietly after the rescue. The world had already moved on to other stories, new discoveries, new mysteries. But for the pilot and the woman he found on that island, the memories never truly faded. They became something softer with time, not sharp with pain anymore, but warm with meaning. The pilot had continued flying. He had seen so many places since then. Deserts glowing gold at sunrise, storm clouds curling like smoke, oceans that stretched without end. But no matter where he went, there was always one part of him that looked down a little longer over the islands, just in case. He said it became a habit he didn't want to lose. The habit of looking for someone who might still be waving. He had stopped recording every flight, though. The camera that once caught the video of her hand waving from the sand now sat in a small box on his shelf. He didn't need to record anymore. Some moments didn't belong to screens or headlines. They belonged to memory. The woman, meanwhile, had built a quiet life away from the noise. She moved to a small coastal town, far from cities. She liked hearing the waves again, this time without fear. Every morning she walked along the beach barefoot, letting the water touch her feet. The sea that once trapped her now comforted her. She had started painting, something she had never done before the accident. Her paintings were mostly of skies, waves, and birds. She said she painted because she wanted to capture the feeling of being free after being forgotten. Some of her paintings even showed a small airplane in the distance, always small, always flying toward the light. The pilot visited her once a year. They never planned it. Somehow it always happened near the same time, early summer when the sea was calm. He would park his car by the small wooden pier, and she would already be waiting, sitting with a cup of tea in her hand, watching the horizon. They didn't talk much about the past anymore. They didn't have to. Every glance, every silence between them already carried the story they shared. One summer evening, when the sky was painted orange and pink, she gave him one of her paintings. It showed a single figure standing on a beach, hand raised toward a small plane flying above. The details were simple, but the feeling was powerful, like a moment frozen in time. He looked at it quietly for a long time. Then he said softly, "You still see it, don't you?" She smiled. "I still feel it," she replied. That moment was when everything changed. "Not just for me, but for you too," he nodded. "I think you're right," he said. "That day made me look at the world differently. I don't take anything for granted anymore." They sat together in silence, listening to the sound of the sea. The air was warm, and for a while it felt like the whole world had stopped moving. After that summer, their visits became less frequent. The pilot had started mentoring younger pilots, teaching them not just how to fly, but how to see. He told them, "When you're up there, you're not just moving through the sky. You're the eyes of the world below. You might see something no one else can. Never look away too quickly." His students listened, but few truly understood the depth behind his words. That one small glance had once saved a life. The woman, on the other hand, had opened a small art studio in her town. People came to see her paintings, drawn not only by their beauty, but by the quiet story they seemed to tell. She never used her full name on them. She signed each one simply with the initials HW. Some said it stood for Hope Wins. She never corrected them. Sometimes young visitors asked her how she managed to survive all those years alone. She would smile gently and say, "You don't survive by fighting the world. You survive by listening to it, by learning its rhythm and waiting for it to speak back." Those words stayed with many who met her. She didn't give lectures or interviews anymore. Her art spoke for her. Years later, when the pilot decided to retire, he planned one last flight, not for work, but for himself. He asked for permission to fly over the same route where he had once found her. His colleagues helped arrange it. They said it was a fitting goodbye. On the morning of that flight, he took the old camera with him again, the same one that had recorded that life-changing moment years ago. The sea below was calm and endless. As he approached the island, he slowed down and lowered his altitude. From the sky, the island looked smaller than he remembered, almost hidden by time. But it was still there, untouched, peaceful. He circled once, twice, and then saw it, the wooden cross still standing near the tree line, weathered but upright. He smiled quietly. He didn't need to land. He just wanted to see it one last time. As he turned the plane back toward the horizon, he said softly, "Thank you," though no one else could hear. When he returned from that flight, he mailed the old camera to her, along with a short letter. It said only this: "For all the things we saw and the ones we didn't, thank you for reminding me to look twice." She received it a few days later. When she opened the box and saw the camera, tears filled her eyes. Not from sadness, but from something deeper, a feeling of closure, of peace. She placed the camera on her desk beside one of her unfinished paintings and whispered, "And thank you for seeing me." That winter, news quietly spread through her small town that the pilot had passed away peacefully in his sleep. There were no big headlines, no grand stories, just a few words in a local newspaper saying that a kind man who once saved a life had flown his final journey. When she heard the news, she didn't cry. She simply went to the beach that evening carrying one of her small paintings, the one she had never shown anyone. It showed the same island, the same sea, but this time, the figure on the beach was gone. Only footprints remained in the sand. She placed the painting in a bottle, sealed it, and let the waves carry it away. Then she stood there, watching the horizon until the sun disappeared. Years passed again, and her story became something told quietly between people, not as a headline, but as a lesson about hope, patience, and the power of a single glance. Children who grew up in her town would often point to planes and wave, laughing as they did. None of them knew exactly why that tradition started, but some said it came from an old story about a woman who once waved at the sky and a pilot who saw her. And so, in a way, they both lived on, in every wave, in every watchful glance toward the clouds, the sea, the sky, and the island. They all held their story, quiet and eternal, because sometimes the smallest act, a wave, a second look, a choice to care, can change a life, and in doing so, change the world.